Let's break this down in the simplest way possible, step by step, word by word, and line by line. And 1. What is Durga? Durga means a fortified capital or a strong city that is well protected. It was the 4th important part of a strong state according to Kautilya. He believed that the capital city should be like a fort to protect the people and the king from enemies.
Number 2.
Frontier posts and officials.
Antipalas.
These were officers in charge of guarding important frontier posts, areas on the edge of the kingdom. These frontier posts acted like watchtowers to keep an eye on the borders and prevent enemies from entering the kingdom. 3. Building the main fort. The main fort, Kautilya gave detailed instructions on how to build the fort in the capital city. Mud walls. He said the fort should have a mud rampart, a big earthen wall, with brick or stone parapets, raised sections where soldiers could stand and defend the fort. Soldiers on the approach. He advised that soldiers should be stationed at important approach points to protect the fort. Example, imagine a castle with tall walls and soldiers standing at the gates to protect the city from attackers.
4.
Moats with crocodiles. 3 moats. Kautilya didn't recommend just 1 moat, but 3 moats around the fort. A moat is a large ditch filled with water, used to make it harder for enemies to attack the fort. Filled with lotuses and crocodiles, he suggested that these moats should have water plants and even crocodiles. The idea was to make it dangerous for enemies to cross the moat. Example, think of a big castle surrounded by water, with plants and even animals like crocodiles in the water to keep enemies away. Now, 5. Supplies and escape routes. Plenty of supplies. Kautilya said the fort should have lots of supplies, like food, water, and weapons, in case the city was under siege. When enemies surround the city and try to capture it, the supplies would help the people survive until the enemy gave up. Secret escape routes. The fort should also have hidden exits, secret tunnels or doors so that people, especially the king, could escape if needed. Example. Imagine you're in a fort with secret underground tunnels. If the enemy surrounds the city, you can sneak out without them knowing. 6. The garrison, soldiers inside the fort. Elephants, chariots, cavalry and infantry. The garrison, group of soldiers defending the fort, should include elephants trained for battle, chariots, carts pulled by horses used in war, cavalry, soldiers on horseback, infantry, soldiers who fight on foot. More than 1 officer. Kautilya suggested that each group, elephants, chariots, cavalry, infantry, should be commanded by more than 1 officer to make sure everything was well organized. 7. Standing army. This means the state should always have a permanent army ready to defend the kingdom. Periodic levies. In addition to the standing army, the king could also recruit more soldiers from the population when needed for special occasions like wars. Example, think of the army like a team of superheroes always ready to fight, but if more heroes are needed, the king can call others to join. And 8. 4 divisions of the army. The army was divided into 4 main parts. Infantry, foot soldiers, were under the officer called Patyadyaksha. Cavalry, horse riders, were under the Ashwadyaksha. Chariots, war chariots, were under the Rathadyaksha. Elephants, war elephants, were under the Hastyadyaksha. Example, imagine different sections of the army, each with its own leader. There's one leader for foot soldiers, another for soldiers on horses, and so on. 9. Important military officers, Senapatis and Nayakas. These were the important military officers who commanded the army. They were like generals who made big decisions during war and battles. 10. Army recruitment from all 4 Varnas. Kautilya said the army should be recruited from all 4 Varnas' social classes. This means people from different backgrounds could join the army, making it strong and diverse. Example, no matter if someone was a farmer, craftsman, or merchant, they could become a soldier if they were strong and capable. 11. Training the army. Importance of training. Kautilya emphasized that the army should be well trained. Training would prepare soldiers for battle and ensure that they could defend the kingdom properly. Example, just like athletes need practice to become good at their sport, soldiers needed practice to fight well in wars. 12. Weapons and magic. Weapons. Kautilya also talked about the types of weapons the army should use in battle. Magical practices. Interestingly, he also mentioned using magical practices or strategies to weaken the enemy or gain an advantage in war. Example, think of it like using special tricks or tactics to confuse the enemy and make it easier to win the battle. Summary of key points. 1. Durga, a strong capital fort with 3 moats filled with crocodiles and secret tunnels. 2. Antapalas, officers who guarded frontier posts. 3. The garrison inside the fort had elephants, chariots, cavalry and infantry, with supplies to survive a siege. 4. A standing army was always ready, with 4 divisions, infantry, cavalry, chariots and elephants. 5. Senapatis and Nayakas were the top military officers. 6. The army was recruited from all 4 Varnas and was well trained to defend the kingdom. 7. Kautilya even talked about using weapons and magic against enemies. By focusing on these key points, Kautilya's recommendations for defense and military are clear. Build a strong fort, have a well-organized army, and be prepared for anything. Let's break this down simply, step by step, so that everything is clear. I'll guide you through each point slowly in the easiest way possible, just like teaching someone with no prior knowledge. 1. Kautilya's ideas on defense and army. Kautilya, in his book, Arthashastra, talks about how the state should organize its defense and army. He emphasizes that the army should be strong, well organized, and ready for battle at all times. Kautilya describes 4 divisions of the army. 1. Infantry, foot soldiers. 2. Cavalry, soldiers on horses. 3. Chariots, war carts pulled by horses. 4. Elephants, used as war animals. He also talks about building forts with walls, moats and secret escape routes to protect cities during war. 2. What does Megasthenes say? Megasthenes was a Greek ambassador who visited India during the time of the Mauryan Empire, the same time as Kautilya. He wrote about what he saw in India, including the administration, how things were organized. Megasthenes mentioned 6 committees, groups of 5 members each that managed different parts of the army. These committees were in charge of 1. The navy, boats used for fighting on water. 2. Equipment and transport, things like weapons and moving supplies. 3. Infantry, foot soldiers. 4. Cavalry, soldiers on horses. 5. Chariots, war carts pulled by horses. 6. Elephants, used in war. Example, imagine 6 groups of 5 people, each in charge of one part of the army. One group manages boats, another handles foot soldiers, and so on. Each group works together to keep the army organized. What's the interesting part? Kautilya doesn't mention the navy, but Megasthenes does. This is important because it shows that India might have had a navy, boats for defense and war, even though Kautilya doesn't talk about it. So, while Kautilya's focus was on land armies, foot soldier, cavalry, chariot elephants, Megasthenes shows that there was likely a navy in addition to these. 4. Ashoka's role and changes in policy. Ashoka, one of the greatest Mauryan kings, made big changes after a war he fought against Kalinga. This war was terrible, with a lot of destruction and death. After seeing the horrible results of this war, Ashoka decided to follow a new policy called Dhammavijaya, which means victory through peace and moral behavior. Example, imagine a king who fights a big war and wins, but when he sees the suffering caused by the war, he decides not to fight anymore. Instead, he tries to win people over by being kind and peaceful. Now, did Ashoka disband his army? Some people think that because Ashoka became peaceful, he might have disbanded, got rid of his army. However, there is no evidence that he did this. In fact, Ashoka's inscriptions, messages carved on rocks, show that he still kept his army. In his 13th rock edict, an important inscription, Ashoka even gives a stern warning to forest tribes. He tells them to behave, or else they will face consequences. This suggests that while Ashoka became peaceful, he still believed in maintaining order and keeping a strong army. Example, think of a king who says, I don't want to fight wars anymore, but still keeps his army strong to protect his kingdom and control troublemakers. Number 6. Ashoka's moral choice. Ashoka's decision to stop fighting wars wasn't just practical, it was a moral choice. He believed that instead of winning through violence, a king should win by being just, kind, and moral. This was called Dhamma Vijaya, victory through moral values. While Ashoka didn't fight wars after Kalinga, he still kept his army, which might have become less active over time due to lack of use. Summary of key points. 1. Kautilya describes a strong land army with infantry, cavalry, chariots and elephants, but does not mention a navy. 2. Megasthenes talks about the army being organized into 6 committees, including one for the navy. 3. Ashoka fought a terrible war with Kalinga and then decided to follow peaceful policies. 4. He did not disband the army, but he stopped fighting wars and focused on moral values. 13th Rock Edict warns forest tribes to behave, showing he still believed in keeping the help of the army. By understanding these points, you can see how different sources, Kautilya, Megasthenes, and Ashoka, give us a picture of the Mauryan army and defense system. Kautilya focused on land armies, Megasthenes showed us the role of the navy, and Ashoka's peaceful reign showed how a king could rule with morality even while keeping his army ready. Alright, let's break this down into very simple, easy to understand parts, step by step, like I'm teaching someone who knows nothing about the topic. 1. What are Ashoka's inscriptions? Ashoka was a king who ruled a long time ago, and he wanted to tell his people what kind of ruler he was. To do this, he wrote messages on rocks and pillars. These messages are called inscriptions. They tell us what Ashoka thought was important, how he ruled, and how he treated people.
2. What are dharmastas?
Dharmastas were likely officials or judges in charge of legal matters, but Ashoka's inscriptions do not mention these officials. Instead, Ashoka talks about other officials who had judicial functions. This means they dealt with justice and fairness. And 3. Judicial officers mentioned in his separate Rock Edict 1, Ashoka talks about how city mahamatas, city officers, should handle legal matters. He gives clear instructions that these officers should be impartial, fair to everyone, and sympathetic, kind-hearted. Ashoka wanted to make sure that no one was put in jail or punished without a good reason. Example, imagine there's a person who did something wrong and the officer must decide whether to punish them or not. Ashoka says the officer should be fair and think carefully before deciding, making sure the punishment is justified, deserved. 4. Regular inspections. Ashoka was very serious about making sure his officers followed these rules. He says that every 5 years he would send a gentle officer on a tour to check if the city officers were doing their job correctly. This officer had to be kind, not harsh or cruel. The prince, governor, in Ujjaini, a city, would also send inspection teams every 3 years, and the Mahamatas from another city, Taxila, would also look into this matter when they travelled. Example, think of Ashoka as the head of a big school. He sends someone kind to check if all the teachers, city officers, are being fair and not punishing students' people without a good reason.
5. Rajas.
Officers with judicial duties. In Pillar Edict 4, Ashoka talks about other officers called Rajakas. These officers had many duties, but one of their important jobs was to handle judicial functions, deciding what's fair in legal matters. So, just like the city Mahamatas, the Rajakas were also responsible for making sure justice was done. 6. Releasing prisoners. In Pillar Edict 5, Ashoka says that every year he released some prisoners. He did this not just once, but 25 times. This shows that Ashoka believed in mercy, kindness, and gave some people a second chance. Example, imagine a person is in prison for doing something wrong. Ashoka, being a kind ruler, might decide to release them if they had learned their lesson and deserved a second chance. Sever the mutta in judicial procedure. Ashoka also mentions samutta in Pillar Edict 4. This word can be tricky, but in simple terms, It means fairness or equality in the way justice was done. Some people think samatha might mean treating everyone equally, regardless of their varna, social class, but the best way to understand it here is as fairness for everyone. Example: if two people come to court, one is rich and the other is poor, Ashoka says they should both be treated fairly, no matter what their background is.
8.
The death penalty. Even though Ashoka is known as a king who loved ahimsa, non-violence, his inscriptions show that the death penalty was still allowed during his time. In Pillar Edict 4, Ashoka talks about a rule he made for people who were sentenced to death. He gave them a 3-day break before the execution, killing them. During these 3 days, 1, the person's family could appeal, ask for the punishment to be changed. 2, the family could visit and console the person. 3, the family and others could pray, fast, and offer gifts for the condemned person's happiness in the next life. Example: imagine someone is sentenced to death. Ashoka gives them 3 days before the sentence is carried out. This time allows their family to visit and pray, hoping for peace in the person's afterlife. 9. Ashoka's approach to justice. From all this, we can see that Ashoka cared a lot about fairness in the legal system. He wanted his officers to be kind and just, and he set up a system of inspections to make sure they did their job properly. He also believed in giving people a second chance by releasing prisoners and showed compassion even to those sentenced to death by giving them time to be with their families. Summary of key points. 1. Ashoka's inscriptions don't mention dharmasthas, officials, but he talks about other officers who handle justice. 2. Ashoka wanted city Mahamatas to be fair and sympathetic and set up a system to check their work. 3. The Rajakas also had judicial duties and helped ensure justice. 4. Ashoka showed mercy by releasing prisoners 25 times. 5. Samatha means fairness in justice, treating everyone equally. 6. Even though Ashoka believed in non-violence, he didn't abolish the death penalty. He gave a 3-day break for those sentenced to death. Ashoka's system of justice shows he was a kind and fair ruler, but he still believed in keeping order and sometimes needed to make hard decisions, like allowing the death penalty. Let's go step by step and make each idea very simple so you can fully understand it.
1. Mitra, the ally.
Mitra means friend or ally. In Kautilya's book, Arthashastra, the ally is one of the 7 important parts that make a kingdom strong. An ally is like a good friend who helps you when you're in trouble or need support in war. If a king has a strong ally, it can make him more powerful because he has someone to back him up. Example? Imagine you are playing a game. If you have a friend, Mitra, to help you, you are more likely to win against others.
Number 2.
Kautilya's interstate policy. This is how Kautilya explains the way kings should deal with other kings. He focuses on the Vijigishu, the king who wants to conquer or expand his kingdom. So if you're a king who wants more land or power, you have to be smart about how you interact with other kings. You need to decide when to make peace, when to fight, or when to stay quiet, depending on the situation.
3.
The Circle of Kings, Raja Mandala. Kautilya talks about a circle of kings called the Raja Mandala. This circle has 4 important kings in it, each with a different role. 1. Vijigishu. This is you, the king who wants to conquer others. You are the one trying to expand your kingdom. 2. Ari, enemy. This is the enemy. It is the king you are planning to fight or take land from. 3. Madhyama, middle king. This is a middle king. He is a king who is in between you and your enemy. He can either help you or help your enemy, depending on who gives him better reasons to join them. 4. Udasena, neutral king. This is a neutral king. He does not want to get involved in your fight. He stays out of the battle and is not interested in helping anyone. Example. Think of 4 boys in a playground. 1 boy, Vijigishu, wants to take another boy's toy, Ari. A 3rd boy, Madhyama, is strong and could help either one, depending on who convinces him. A 4th boy, Udasena, just watches from the side and doesn't want to get involved. For 6 policies, Shadgunya, Kautilya says there are 6 ways or policies a king should use when dealing with other kings. These depend on the situation the king is in. 1.
Peace treaty.
If a king is weaker than his enemy, it's best to make a peace treaty agreement. This way, the king avoids fighting and can save his kingdom. Example, if you know the other boy in the playground is much stronger than you, you can make peace by offering him something so he won't fight you. 2. Vigraha, hostility. If a king is stronger than the enemy, he should show hostility, meaning he should be ready to fight and take what he wants. Example, if you are bigger and stronger than the other boy, you might decide to just take the toy from him. 3. Asana, keeping quiet. If the king's power is equal to the enemy's, the best thing is to stay quiet and not start a fight. Example, if you and the other boy are equally strong, it's smarter to avoid a fight because neither of you is sure to win. 4. Yana, marching on a military expedition. If the king is much stronger than the enemy, he should go to war and try to conquer. Example, if you are much stronger than the other boy, you can decide to march over and take the toy with no fear of losing. 5. Samshraya, seeking shelter. If the king is very weak, it's better to seek shelter with a stronger king or hide in a safe place like a fort. Example, if you are very small and weak, you can ask a stronger friend for protection, or you can go to a safe place where no one can reach you. 6. Dvaidibhevava, double policy. If the king can get help from an ally, he should make peace with one king and fight another. If you are not strong enough to win alone, you can ask one friend to join you and fight the other boy together. Number 5. 3 types of conquerors. Kautilya describes 3 types of kings who conquer other lands. 1. Asura Vijayan, demonic conqueror. This kind of king is very cruel. He takes everything, the land, the riches, the people, and even kills the enemy. Example, imagine a boy who not only takes the toy, but also destroys everything the other boy has and hurts him badly. This is a demonic conqueror. 2. Lobhavijayan, greedy conqueror. This king is motivated by greed. He wants land and riches, but he may not hurt people as much as the demonic conqueror. Example, a boy who just wants to take the toy and doesn't care about hurting the other boy too much. He is mainly interested in getting what he wants. 3. Dharma Vijayan, righteous conqueror. This king is the righteous one. He conquers because he wants honor or glory. He is satisfied when the other king surrenders and he doesn't destroy or kill too much. Example, a boy who only takes the toy to show that he is stronger, but doesn't hurt the other boy much. He just wants to be respected. Recap of key ideas. 1. Mitra is the ally, an important friend who helps a king in tough times. Kautilya talks about a circle of kings. The 4 main types of kings are the Vijijishu, you, the one who wants to conquer, the Ari, enemy, the Madhyama, middle king who could help either side, and the Udasina, neutral king who doesn't want to get involved. 3. Kautilya gives 6 policies for how kings should act in different situations. Peace treaty if you're weaker, hostility if you're stronger, staying quiet if you're equally strong, marching to war if you're much stronger, seeking shelter if you're very weak, making peace with one and fighting another if you can get help from an ally. 4. There are 3 types of conquerors. The demonic conqueror, who destroys everything, the greedy conqueror, who wants land and wealth, and the righteous conqueror, who conquers for honor and doesn't hurt too much. By following these strategies and understanding how different kings act, Kautilya teaches that a wise king can become powerful and successful in ruling his kingdom. One, the Maurya Empire and forest people. The Maurya Empire was one of the strongest empires in ancient India, led by kings like Chandragupta Maurya and Ashoka. Even though the empire was powerful, it had a difficult time controlling forest people, tribes who lived deep in the forests and didn't follow the same rules as the rest of the empire. The forest people lived outside cities and farmlands, in wild areas. They were independent, and many of them didn't want to be controlled by the Maurya rulers. This caused problems for the empire because it couldn't control all parts of its territory easily. 2. Kasambi's idea on forest people and agriculture. D.D. Kasambi was a historian who studied how the Maurya Empire grew. He said that as the empire expanded and more land was used for farming, the forest people lost their land and had to deal with changes in their way of life. The Mauryas wanted to expand their empire to include more land and people, but to do this, they needed to figure out how to handle the tribes living in forests. Example: imagine your school is building more classrooms and wants to take over the playground where some kids play. These kids, the forest people, don't want to lose their space, but the school, the Maurya Empire, wants to use all the land for its own purposes. This creates a conflict. 3. Aloka Parashar Sen's argument. Aloka Parashar Sen was another historian who studied the Maurya Empire. She said that no matter how powerful the Maurya Empire was, it couldn't easily control the many different kinds of people living in its territory, especially the forest tribes. She also explained that in the Maurya period, there was a change in how the empire treated the forest people. In the past, they were often excluded or ignored by the empire. But now, the Mauryas started to think about how to control and include them in the empire. The Mauryas didn't just want to push the forest people away anymore. They wanted to make them follow their rules. This was because the empire needed to use their land and keep them from causing trouble. Example, in the school, instead of pushing the playground kids away, the principal might try to include them in school activities, but the kids have to follow the school's rules. This way, the principal can control them and use the playground area for the school's needs. Number 4. How the Arthashastra describes forest people. The Arthashastra was a book written by Kautilya, also known as Chanakya, an advisor to Chandragupta Maurya. It is a guidebook on how to run a kingdom and talks about how to deal with different kinds of people, including forest tribes. Mlech Chajati. This is a negative term used for forest people in the Arthashastra. It basically means uncivilized people or foreigners. The Mauryas thought the forest people were different and often looked down on them. Atavika. This term was used for wild tribes who lived deep in the forest. They were strong, brave, and independent. The Arthashastra says they were always causing trouble by fighting, stealing, and killing. The Mauryas saw them as a constant problem because they didn't follow the rules of the empire and often fought back. Example: in the school, these wild tribes, Atavika, would be like the tough kids who don't follow the rules, fight with other students, and sometimes take things from the school. The principal sees them as a problem because they're hard to control. Aranyachara. This word was used for forest dwellers who weren't as wild as the Atavika. They lived in or near the forest but didn't cause as much trouble. The Maurya rulers sometimes used these people to help guard the borders of the empire. The empire gave them jobs to protect certain areas. Example, in the school, these forest dwellers, Aranyachara, would be like the kids who live near the playground but don't cause as much trouble. The principal might ask them to help guard the school gates or keep an eye on the other kids. Barikas. These were wandering tribes who didn't live in one place. They often had criminal behaviors like stealing or breaking laws and were seen as a threat to the empire. Example, in the school, these wandering tribes, Barikas, would be like kids who come from outside the school and cause trouble, like stealing toys or school rules. The principal sees them as dangerous. Number 5. How the Maurya Empire controlled the forest people. The Maurya rulers didn't just fight the forest people all the time. They used different strategies to control them. Spies disguised as hermits. The Arthashastra suggests sending spies disguised as hermits, holy men, to go into the forest areas and secretly gather information about what the forest people were planning. This helped the Maurya rulers stay informed and ready for any trouble. Example: imagine the principal sending a nice quiet teacher to the playground to find out what the wild kids are planning, but the teacher is really a spy gathering information. Bribing forest chiefs. Instead of fighting with the forest tribes all the time, the Mauryas sometimes bribed the forest chiefs with gifts or money to get them to cooperate. This was a way of keeping peace without going to war. Example, in the school, the principal might offer the leader of the playground kids some snacks or toys to stop them from causing trouble. The leader takes the bribe and agrees to help the principal. Number 6, fortresses and borders. The Artha Shastra also talks about building fortresses near the borders of the empire. These forts were controlled by frontier chiefs who were in charge of keeping the empire safe from enemies. The area between the empire and the fortresses was guarded by forest tribes like the Chandalas, Shabaras and Pulindas. The Maurya rulers used these tribes to defend the kingdom from outsiders. Example, in the school, the principal builds a wall around the school, and the kids from the playground are asked to guard the gates and protect the school from outsiders. The principal gives them special jobs to keep the school safe. 7. Summary of key points. The Maurya Empire had trouble controlling the forest people who lived outside the cities and farmlands. D.D. Kosambi said that as the Mauryas expanded their empire, they needed to take control of the forest areas, but this affected the lives of the forest people. Aloka Parashar explained that the Mauryas couldn't ignore the forest tribes anymore, so they started to control and include them in the empire. The Arthashastra uses different words for forest tribes: Mlecha Jati, uncivilized people; Atavika, wild tribes causing trouble; Aranyachara, forest dwellers who sometimes helped the empire; Barikas, wandering, dangerous tribes. The Mauryas used spies, bribes and fortresses to keep control over the forest people. They also used forest tribes to guard the borders of the empire and protect the kingdom. Let's break down this complex topic step by step, word by word, in the simplest way possible. I'll help you understand everything clearly, just like teaching a young child with no knowledge of the subject. 1. Forest people, not part of an ideal Janapada. Janapada means land of the people, or a region where people live under a kingdom. Forest people didn't live in regular cities or farmlands, they lived in the forests. The Maurya Empire, especially Kautilya, Chanakya, didn't think forest people were part of an ideal society because they lived differently from people in towns. Example, imagine a big school where all the students follow the same rules. The forest people are like kids who live outside the school and don't always follow the school's rules. 2. Forest resources were valuable. Kautilya understood that forests had important resources like timber, wood, iron, copper, and lead metals. Dravyavana means material forests where these resources could be found. Forests with elephants, Hastivana, were extra special because elephants were used in wars. Example, think of the forest like a toy store. It has many important toys, resources like wood and metals. The school principal, the king, wants to control these toys because they are valuable. 3. Forest people used by the empire. Kautilya suggested that the forest people could be useful for the empire. They could work as soldiers called Atavibala, spies, or even assassins to help the empire. Example, imagine the principal of a school asking the kids who live outside the school to help by being security guards or detectives. The principal sees that these kids can be helpful in some way. Number 4. Ashoka's interaction with forest tribes. Ashoka, a famous Maurya emperor, had several messages or inscriptions, carved writings, about forest tribes. In Rock Edict 13, Ashoka gave a warning to forest tribes, telling them to behave and not expect forgiveness if they did bad things. Some tribes, like the Pitinikas and Andhras, followed Ashoka's teaching of Dhamma, a way of living with good morals, so they were not in trouble. Example, Ashoka is like the principal telling some kids who live outside the school, you need to behave, or you won't be forgiven if you keep causing problems. But some other kids, tribes, are already behaving well and following the rules, so they are okay. Number 5. Ashoka's appeal to border tribes. In another message called Rock Edict 2, Ashoka tells the tribes living near the borders of his empire not to be afraid of him. He asks them to follow his peaceful way of living, Dhamma. He also sent Dhammamhamatas, officers or teachers, to teach these tribes about living peacefully. Example, Ashoka is like a principal telling kids on the edges of the schoolyard, don't be scared, I'm not here to hurt you, just follow the school rules and live in peace. 6. Conservation of forests. Conservation of forests. In Pillar Edict 5, Ashoka killing of many animals. He also stopped people from burning forests because he wanted to protect them. Example. Ashoka is like a principal who says, no one is allowed to harm the animals on the playground and no one should set the trees on fire. We need to take care of them. 7. Impact on forest people's lives. Ashoka's ahimsa policy, non-violence, had a big impact on forest people. They depended on hunting and fishing to survive. By banning hunting, Ashoka was affecting their way of life. Example. If the principal stops kids from playing ball in the playground because he wants to protect it, the kids who love playing ball will be upset because their favorite game is banned. 8. Could Ashoka really enforce all these rules? Even though Ashoka talked a lot about banning hunting and protecting animals, it's likely he couldn't fully control what all the forest people did. His power was limited in far-off areas. Example. Imagine the principal telling all the kids outside the school to follow new rules. It's hard for him to check on every kid far from the schoolyard, so some kids might still do what they want without him knowing. Additional information. Spies were important in the Maurya Empire. They were often sent into forests disguised as hermits, holy men, to gather information. The empire also sometimes gave gifts or money to forest chiefs to keep peace. Example. The principal might send a teacher dressed like a friendly student to the playground to secretly find out if the kids are planning trouble, or the principal might give the leader of the kids snacks to keep them happy and peaceful. I hope this helps you understand the Maurya Empire, especially Kautilya and Ashoka, interacted with the forest people and why they weren't. Let's break this down slowly and clearly, as if teaching a young child. Who was Ashoka? Ashoka was a king in India a long time ago, around 300 BCE. At first, he is said to have been a very cruel and mean ruler. He fought wars and caused a lot of suffering, but then something changed in him. He found the teachings of Buddhism, which are called the Buddha's Dhamma, Buddha's way of life. What is Buddha's Dhamma? The Buddha's Dhamma is the set of teachings given by Buddha. It talks about being kind, calm, and understanding the world as it really is. The Dhamma teaches us to not harm others, to live peacefully, and to care for all living things. What was Ashoka's conversion to Buddhism? Ashoka's conversion means that he stopped being cruel and started following the Buddha's Dhamma, changing his way of life. But the word conversion is tricky here. We often think of converting like switching from one religion to another, like choosing one team over another. But back then in Ashoka's time, things weren't so strict. People didn't think of religions as separate boxes like we do today. So Ashoka didn't convert in the way we think of it today, but more like adopting the Buddha's teachings to change how he behaved. How did Ashoka change? Different stories explain how Ashoka learned about Buddhism and became a better person. One, Mahavamsa and Dipavamsa, these are old Buddhist texts. They say that Ashoka changed after listening to a young boy monk named Nigroda. Nigroda was only 7 years old, but had become a Buddhist monk and was wise. Ashoka met him, listened to him talk about the Buddha's teachings, touched Ashoka's heart, making him realize he should be a better, kinder king. 2. Divyavadana, another old story. This story says that Ashoka became interested in Buddhism after meeting a monk named Samudra. Samudra was originally a merchant, someone who buys and sells things, but later became a monk. Ashoka had a torture chamber where he punished people, but when he tortured Samudra, Samudra stayed calm and didn't complain. This made Ashoka wonder what gave Samudra such peace and strength. It led him to explore the Buddha's teachings. Number 3, Ashokavadana, another ancient story. This story mixes the first two. It says that Samudra, who was the 12-year-old son of a merchant, is the one who influenced Ashoka to follow Buddhism. Why are there different versions of the story? Different stories exist because they were written down at different times by different people. Each person wanted to show how Ashoka found peace through Buddhism, but they focused on different characters, Nigroda or Samudra, to explain how it happened. Example to understand. Think of Ashoka like a bad king who realized he needed to be kinder, just like a bully at school who realizes he should stop hurting others after hearing a nice message from a friend or teacher. Whether the message comes from a wise child or a calm adult, the important thing is that the message changes the bully's heart. What's the lesson? The big lesson from Ashoka's story is that people can change. Even someone as powerful and cruel as a king can become kind and peaceful when they learn and follow good teachings like the Buddha's Dhamma. Is that clear so far? Would you like to dive deeper into any part of it? Let's break it down further, step by step, in the simplest way possible.
That's just one.
Who was Ashoka? Ashoka was an ancient Indian king from the Maurya dynasty. He is famous for his rule and his spread of Buddhism. He started as a king who used wars and violence to expand his empire, but later he changed and became a follower of Buddha's teachings of non-violence and peace. 2. What are Ashoka's inscriptions? Ashoka had his messages and thoughts carved on rocks and pillars. These are called inscriptions. They were his way of communicating with his people and future generations. These inscriptions tell us what Ashoka thought and how he ruled after he became a follower of Buddha. 3. Buddhist stories versus Ashoka's inscriptions. Buddhist stories say that Ashoka was a very bad person before he followed Buddha's teachings. They also say that his change was sudden, as if one day he heard the teachings and immediately became a good person. However, Ashoka's inscriptions don't mention this sudden change. Ashoka himself says that his transformation happened slowly, not in one moment. Let's explain both versions. Buddhist stories. These stories say that Ashoka was a cruel and violent king, and after hearing the teachings of Buddha, he instantly changed. In one story, a 7-year-old monk named Nigroda preached to Ashoka, and he was deeply moved. In another version, a monk named Samudra was tortured by Ashoka, but stayed calm and peaceful, which inspired Ashoka to change. Xuanzang, a famous Chinese traveller, supports this version, saying that Ashoka was moved by Samudra's calmness under torture. Ashoka's inscriptions. Ashoka never mentions these sudden changes in his inscriptions. In his 13th major rock edict, Ashoka talks about the Kalinga War, which deeply affected him. He felt great sorrow after seeing the destruction and suffering caused by the war. This was a key moment that made him rethink his ways and move towards peace. Minor Rock Edict 1 explains that Ashoka's journey towards Buddhism was slow and gradual. He wasn't very serious about it at first, but became more dedicated over time.
The Kalinga War!
The Kalinga War is an important event in Ashoka's life. The war happened in the 9th year of Ashoka's rule. It was a brutal war with many deaths and lots of suffering. After seeing the destruction, Ashoka felt deep regret. This made him decide to follow a path of non-violence and peace. This event played a huge role in his decision to turn to Buddhism and spread compassion and kindness. Why is this important? The Buddhist texts don't mention the Kalinga War, but Ashoka himself says it was a turning point in his life. This shows that Ashoka's change was not just about hearing the teachings of Buddhism, but also about feeling deep sorrow for his past actions. 5. Ashoka's gradual change, Minor Rock Edict 1. In his Minor Rock Edict 1, Ashoka tells us he became a lay follower of Buddhism, someone who believes in Buddha's teachings but is not a monk. At first, he wasn't very serious about following the teachings, but over time, he got closer to the Sangha, the community of Buddhist monks, and became more dedicated. This shows that Ashoka's change happened slowly, step by step. It wasn't a quick or sudden transformation like some Buddhist stories suggest. Number 6. Ashoka's personal devotion to Buddhism. Ashoka showed his devotion to Buddhism through his actions. There are 2 important inscriptions that tell us about his personal faith. Ruminde inscription. 20 years after becoming king, Ashoka visited Lumbini, the place where Buddha was born. He worshipped there to honor Buddha. He built a stone wall around the area to protect it and installed a pillar to mark his visit. He also gave the people living in the nearby village some tax relief, reduced their taxes as a sign of respect. And the B, Nigali Saga inscription. 14 years after becoming king, Ashoka visited a place called Nigali Sagar. There was a stupa there, which is a structure built to honor Buddha. This stupa held the remains of Buddha Konamana, a mythical Buddha. Ashoka enlarged the stupa to double its size, showing his deep respect. 6 years later, he visited the place again and had a pillar built to mark his visit. What does this show? These actions prove that Ashoka was deeply committed to honoring Buddha and Buddhism, not just in words, but through his actions. He didn't just preach about peace and Buddhism. He made sure to visit important places connected to Buddha's life and respect them by building walls, pillars, and stupas. 7. Lessons from Ashoka's life. 1. Change takes time. Ashoka didn't suddenly become a good person. His transformation was slow and steady. It was influenced by the Kalinga War and his growing closeness to Buddhist monks. 2. Actions matter. Ashoka showed his belief in Buddhism through his actions, visiting holy places, building pillars and stupas, and giving tax relief to the people. His actions speak louder than stories. 3. Kalinga War as a turning point. The Kalinga War was a major event that made Ashoka realize the horrors of war. This pushed him to adopt non-violence and peace. 4. Respect for Buddhist sites. Ashoka's visits to Lumbini and Nigalisagar show how much he respected the places connected with Buddha's life and teachings. Examples to understand better. 1. Gradual change. Imagine you start learning to play a musical instrument. At first, you are not very serious, but over time, as you practice more and listen to teachers, you become better and more dedicated. This is like Ashoka's slow change towards Buddhism. He didn't become a perfect follower right away, but gradually over time. 2. Respect for important places. Think of Ashoka visiting Lumbini like someone visiting the birthplace of a great leader or teacher they admire. He showed his respect by making sure the place was protected with a stone wall and remembered with a pillar. I hope this breakdown helps you understand Ashoka's gradual change and his deep respect for Buddhism. Would you like to explore any other details or examples? All right. Let's break this down into the simplest explanation possible, step by step. 1. What is a Buddhist council? A Buddhist council is a meeting of Buddhist monks to discuss important matters about Buddhism, like its teachings or practices. These councils are held to keep the religion's practices pure and true to its original form. 2. First 2 Buddhist councils. The first Buddhist council was held right after Buddha's death. It took place in Rajagriha, now called Rajgir, in India. The goal was to remember and preserve Buddha's teachings. The second Buddhist council happened 100 years later in Vaishali, another place in India. This meeting was to discuss whether some monks were breaking the rules of Buddhism. 3. The third Buddhist council, according to Pali Chronicles, the Pali Chronicles, which are ancient Buddhist texts written in the Pali language, say that there was a third Buddhist council during the reign of King Ashoka. They say this council was held in Pataliputra, now Patna in India. It was led by a monk named Moggaliputta Tissa. The purpose was to remove monks who were not following the correct Buddhist teachings. Ashoka was believed to be involved in this council. 4. Ashoka's inscriptions do not mention the council. But here's something interesting. Ashoka's inscriptions, his messages carved on rocks and pillars, do not talk about this council at all. This creates confusion because Ashoka himself doesn't mention something so important. So there are different theories or possible explanations about what really happened. Hashtag 5. Possible explanations for the confusion. A. The council never happened. Some people think maybe there was no council during Ashoka's reign at all. This means that the story in the Pali Chronicles could be wrong or made up later. B. It was a small event. Another explanation is that there might have been a small local meeting involving Moggaliputta Tissa and some monks. Ashoka might not have been directly involved, which is why he didn't mention it in his inscriptions. C. Confusion between two councils. A third possibility is that there were actually two different councils, but over time people confused them and thought they were the same event. This mix-up might explain why the Pali Chronicles talk about the council, but Ashoka doesn't. 6. Ashoka's Schism Edict. Ashoka did issue something called a Schism Edict. A schism means a division or split. This edict talked about removing monks who didn't follow the rules. Some scholars believe this edict might be indirect evidence of some council or meeting that was held to deal with the issues in the Buddhist community. And number 7, Heinz Bechert's argument. A scholar named Heinz Bechert in 1982 argued that Ashoka's involvement wasn't about doctrinal differences, meaning differences in beliefs or teachings. Instead, Ashoka was more focused on making sure monks and nuns followed proper monastic discipline, the rules and behaviors expected in a monastery. This means Ashoka wasn't dealing with big arguments about Buddhist beliefs, but rather about how monks and nuns were behaving. 8. Key takeaways. The Pali Chronicles claim that Ashoka was involved in a third Buddhist council, but Ashoka's own inscriptions do not mention this. There are different possibilities for this. The council may never have happened. It may have been a smaller local event, or there might have been two councils that got confused. Ashoka's Schism Edict could be a clue that some meeting or council was held to deal with misbehaving monks. Scholars like Heinz Bechert think Ashoka's role was more about keeping monks in line with the rules rather than solving disputes over Buddhist teachings. Example to understand better. Think of it like a school meeting. Imagine your school holds a meeting to decide if some students are breaking the rules. Now there are two possibilities. One version of the story, like the Pali Chronicles, might say the principal Ashoka led the meeting to clean up the school, removing bad students. Another version, Ashoka's inscriptions, might not mention this meeting at all. It could be that the principal wasn't really involved and it was just a small meeting with teachers, monks, without his direct involvement. So over time, the stories got mixed up and people started thinking the principal was the main person in charge, even though the reality might have been different. Does this explanation help clearer? Would you like more examples or details on any part of the story? Let's break this down into the simplest way so you can understand it easily, step by step. 1. What is the Mahavamsa? The Mahavamsa is a very old book written in the Pali language. It tells the history of Sri Lanka and talks a lot about Buddhism. It mentions stories about King Ashoka and his efforts to spread Buddhism to other regions.
2.
Buddhist missions after the Third Council. The Mahavamsa says that after the Third Buddhist Council, the meeting we talked about earlier, King Ashoka sent out Buddhist monks to spread Buddhism to many places outside his kingdom. Think of it like Ashoka sending out teachers to other countries and regions to tell people about Buddha's teachings. 3. Who were the monks and where did they go? The Mahavamsa gives us the names of these monks and tells us where they went. Let's go through them one by one. Majjhima, Kassapagota, Dundibisara, Sahadeva, and Mulakadeva. These monks were sent to the Himalayan region, which is the area around modern-day Nepal, Bhutan, and Tibet. Example, it's like teachers going to the mountain areas to spread the message. Maharakita, he went to Yona. This is thought to be in the northwest of India, possibly modern-day Afghanistan or Pakistan. Imagine sending someone to a faraway region in the northwest to teach people there. Majjantika, he went to Kashmir and Gandhara. These places are in modern-day Pakistan and northern India. Example, think of Kashmir as a northern snowy region where the monk went to spread Buddhism. Mahadev, he was sent to Mahishamandala, which is likely in central India. Imagine a monk going to the heart of India to teach Buddhism. He went to Ahram, which was in western Malwa, modern-day Gujarat or Maharashtra in western India. Example, a monk going to the west coast to spread Buddha's teachings. Rakita, he went to Vanavasi, which is located in the southern part of India, modern-day Karnataka. Imagine sending a monk to a southern forested area to teach people there.
Mud.
He went to Maharatha, which is in the western Deccan, around modern-day Maharashtra. Example, this monk goes to the Deccan Plateau in the west to spread the message. Sona and Uttara, these two monks were sent to Suvarnabhumi, which could be Myanmar or some part of Southeast Asia. Example, it's like sending monks to foreign lands in the east, where people have never heard of Buddhism. Mahinda. He was sent to Lanka, which is Sri Lanka. Example, a monk being sent to an island to spread Buddhism. So 4. Connection to Sanchi. At a place called Sanchi, where there are ancient Buddhist stupas, big mounds or structures built to house relics or remains, 2 names from this list. Marjima and Kasapagota are found on a relic casket. A relic casket is a special box that holds sacred items. This shows that these monks might have played an important role in Buddhism at Sanchi as well. Now 5. Summary of Ashoka's missions. So, to summarize, after the Third Buddhist Council, King Ashoka sent out monks to different parts of India and to foreign lands to spread Buddha's teachings. These monks went to places like the Himalayas, Sri Lanka, Kashmir, and even faraway regions like Southeast Asia. The goal was to teach Buddhism to people who had never heard about it before. Example to understand better. Think of Ashoka as the principal of a big school. After a meeting with his teachers, the Third Council, he decides to send these teachers to different schools in other cities or even other countries to spread important lessons, Buddhism. Each teacher goes to a different place, some near, some far, but all with the same goal, to teach the message of Buddha to new people. Does this explanation help? Let me know if you need any more details.